Hi everyone, I'm Jim Rizoli. This is Rizoli TV, and today we have a special guest, Benton Bradberry. And the reason why I wanted to have him on today is because he wrote a book, The Myth of German Villainy, and there's the book right there, if you can see it. And I out of all the books I've read, I read a lot of books, and I thought that this was probably the best book I've ever read, dealing with the whole picture of Germany from the beginning all the way up till now. I've never read a better book than this, and I've been telling a lot of people about the book. So Benton, do you want me to address you as Ben or Benton?
Ben. Ben is fine.
Okay,
yeah.
so Ben is the way we're going to address you then. That's fine. And Ben, maybe you can tell us a little bit about where you live, and then we'll get into some aspects about the writing of your book. So where do you live?
Yeah, I live in Jacksonville, Florida, and I was born in 1937 in Oak Grove, Louisiana, which is a little cotton town on the southern tip of the Mississippi Delta, and I grew up in West Monroe, Louisiana. Now you've probably heard of that. Okay. As a small a place as it is, because that's where the Duck Dynasty lives.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well, I never watched them, so I don't really know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
So anyway, I grew up in the Duck Dynasty culture in West Monroe, Louisiana, out in the country.
Yeah.
And we were very poor growing up. We had 10 kids in the family. I had a twin brother. My dad was an auto mechanic. My mother stayed at home, and she had 10 kids, so she could hardly do anything else.
Wow.
And when when I graduated from high school, my twin brother and I joined the Navy, which was there were no prospects for us in West Monroe, Louisiana, and which was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I scored pretty high on the basic battery test when I went in, so I was sent through a series of Navy schools and wound up as a radar operator on a big Super Constellation 4-engine airplane. That's the one they used in the airlines. And it was equipped with long-range radar, and we were deployed up to Argentia, Newfoundland, and we flew a loop all the way down to the Azores Islands and back about every other day. It took 16 hours to go. And we were guarding against being bombed by Russian bombers, which looking back is absurd, but at that time we were told to believe it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we only lasted a couple of years because those planes were rendered obsolete by long-range land-based over-the-horizon radar, so they decommissioned our squadron, and I went down to the Hurricane Hunter Squadron here in Jacksonville and spent a year and a half in that, chasing hurricanes. And the officers I worked for thought I was a pretty bright kid, and so they arranged for me to go over to Pensacola, Florida, to enter the flight training program. And I spent 2 years in flight training and came out as a helicopter pilot, flew fixed wing also, but wound up in a helicopter squadron in Norfolk, Virginia, which was anti-submarine, anti-Russian submarine. Mm-hmm. We were at sea about 2/3 of the time, and then back at home base about 1/3 of the time. And we drilled and practiced on how to detect and destroy Russian submarines.
Wow. Oh, gee. That's interesting. So what happened after that?
Well, then I went out to several places. I went down to training command in Pensacola as a trainer, as an instructor pilot. Yeah. Later on, I went out to Vietnam and was a helicopter pilot out there.
Wow.
Won an air medal and some other medals and so forth. And from there, I went to Navy postgraduate school. Now, mind you, I was only a high school graduate at that point.
Wow.
And I was lucky to get in the Navy postgraduate school, and I graduated with a degree in political science and international relations, with honors, by the way.
Wow.
And then went back to the fleet for another tour, and I retired, and in Jacksonville is where the Navy turned me out, so that's how I happened to be here.
So how long were you in from beginning to end?
21 years.
Wow, 20. So you retired from the Navy?
From the Navy, yeah.
Okay, wow.
I was in from 1955 to 1977.
Wow. So after your retirement, what did you do for work?
Well, I planned ahead a little bit, and my wife and I got real estate licenses, and we went to work for a large real estate company here with about 300 or so salespeople. And within a year, my wife was the top salesman, and I was number 9.
Wow.
So we were good salespeople, and so we opened our own business, real estate business, and rose up to be the third-ranking real estate business in Jacksonville.
Wow.
And we got divorced, I guess too much togetherness after all that separation in the Navy. Got divorced and sold the business, which was kind of stupid.
Yeah.
I took the property management division out, built it up to be the second largest property management business in Jacksonville. A few years later, I opened a dental business, of all things. I'm no dentist.
Oh, no kidding.
And so now we have been in that business for 26 years now.
So you're a dentist?
I'm not a dentist.
Oh, you're not.
The business side of it, and we have dentists. That,
Oh, okay, okay. Are you married now?
Yes, I went out to Ukraine about 21 years ago, 22 years ago, with a doctor friend of mine, and we went to tour the regional hospital he wanted to in Kiev, Ukraine. Our tour guide for the hospital was a young, beautiful gynecologist named Marika, and I married her.
Okay, she's the blonde woman. She's blonde, right?
And she came back here, we've been married 21 years.
Oh, wow.
And she and I run the business together.
Okay, so you run a dental, some sort of dental business type of thing.
A dental business.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
So
And how I happen to write these books is that the business, after all those years, pretty much runs itself. We have talented people in every job.
Right.
In my job, I have an office upstairs and a computer and a lot of time on my hands as everything, all the wheels are turning. So I wrote 2 books.
Okay, what was the other book you wrote then?
The other one was a memoir, autobiography, called Putting on Airs, and it was about my military service and all the traveling around the world I've done, and that kind of thing.
Okay, so
but anyway, we've been very prosperous in life, thank God.
Yeah.
And I still work, and we still own the business.
Okay. All right. So now let's talk about this book here, because I've never read any book like it. Okay.
I'm sorry?
I said I've never read anything like it.
You're breaking up.
Okay. I don't know why.
Okay, now I hear you.
Okay. Well, anyway, this book is a very unique book. Yeah.
No, you're breaking up still. I can't.
Okay. I don't know why it's breaking up.
Okay, I hear you okay now.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll get closer to the thing. Well, anyway, how did you get into the topic with this book?
The topic of the book?
Yes.
I've been a serial reader, one book after another, since I was a child. And I've read hundreds of books. And this events of the 20th century, World War I, World War II, even back in the Franco-Prussian War of the previous century, have been an interest of mine. I got a degree in international relations and political science. And you said this is the first comprehensive book you've read that starts from the beginning and goes through the
Yeah.
And that is interesting because reading these books about these events in the 20th century, they're treated, World War I, the Hungarian Revolution, the Spanish Civil War, World War II, are all treated as separate and distinct entities without very much reference to the other events. And it began to occur to me that these were not distinct, individual, isolated events at all, but were a pattern that began in 70, 71 with the Franco-Prussian War. I would say you could even begin there and bring it all the way to even to the present day, are all a string of related events. And so I thought that needed to be treated that way, to start from the beginning and take it all the way through World War II.
Okay. Now, if you could just sum up your book, just like if you had to kind of sum it up, what would you like? If you had to say to someone, "Here's what my book is about."
Okay. The main theme of the book is the mischaracterization of the Germans as a people and the German nation. They've been totally mischaracterized. They've been made out to be by relentless propaganda, beginning with World War I and even going on today. If you tune into the History Channel, you see it even now. Mm-hmm. This relentless anti-German propaganda, painting these people as somehow uniquely different from everybody else. They were predisposed to violence, predisposed to war, predisposed to following a dictator, blindly following him. And this is my phone. Let me.
Okay. I can edit this out, so don't worry. If something happens, just stop, and then just start up again, and I edit that out, so don't worry about that.
About that, yeah. And anyway, where was I?
Well, about how Germany, the German people have been villainized.
It's characterized as anyway. I said I read a lot, and I've started to read books written by Germans. German soldiers. One I remember was the Deutschland division, written by an enlisted man, and talked about the invasion of Russia and going into Belarus. He talked about his fellow soldiers and about his officer that was over him, who was a captain that he highly admired, and all this. And I said, these people are the same as we are, soldiers and the army fighting for their country. And soon you begin to realize that there's nothing unique about the Germans, except if you want to say that they're unique. They're uniquely civilized and cultured and capable as a people. Right. And when I started to realize that, it put a whole new twist on I began to see that the way the Germans were portrayed was pure the result of propaganda. Right. Pure and simple.
Right. Now, I know you get into.
Oh yeah, let me just say that the second theme is the role international Jewry, the Jews, played during this 20th century, and it was central. It's taboo to make too much about that today. They'll attack you if you do, but they had an inordinate control over events during this period. They surrounded the leaders of the Allied countries and virtually dictated what our foreign policy was.
Right, right.
And even the occupation was dictated by the Jews.
Right.
In terms of the occupation, in terms of the surrender and everything.
Right. Now here's what interested me about this, and that's why I really liked the book, was you explained that in the beginning, Britain and France actually made a move on Germany because it was jealousy. I mean, because of their economic prosperity.
Well, more than just jealousy, Germany, as you know, became a consolidated nation state in 1871 after the Franco-Prussian War. Otto von Bismarck, after the war, managed to pull Germany was just a geographic expression before that for Central Europe, all the little German entities in Central Europe that spoke German. And there were about 230 of them or something like that, little private estates, monarchies, principalities, and so on. And Bismarck managed to bring all these together and create the modern German state. And after doing so, they began to grow exponentially. And industry, they took the lead in technological development, chemistry, everything. And they began to outproduce Britain in manufacturing, and even take some of Britain's markets away. And Britain they've always been the superpower, I mean, for a couple hundred years, superpower of the world. And they've always had a sharp eye on the continent of Europe, and they never permitted any consolidation of power which would compete with the British Empire. And Germany was a competitor. Right. And they began to scheme about how Germany could be cut down to size, and so Britain had that reason to go to war with Germany. They wanted to destroy Germany's economic power because it rivaled that of the British Empire. Now, France had declared war on Prussia in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. I won't get into why, but they lost the war and had to pay reparations, and Germany took the two provinces of Alsace and Lorraine and made them part of Germany. Now, they were a majority German-speaking, ethnic German population anyway, which had previously been taken away from Germany by Louis XIV, I think it was. So they had a cause, had a justification for it. But France, during all this, after that, they focused on and obsessed over an eventual war against Germany to get their colonies back and also to salvage their honor. They taught it in their military academies. Politicians talked about it all the time. So France was seething for the opportunity to get into a war with Germany. Russia now had wanted a warm water outlet from the Black Sea through the Istanbul, the strait there, what's it called, I forget. But unfortunately, that was owned by the Ottoman Empire, which was an ally of Germany, and Germany had a fleet there in Istanbul. So Russia wanted to go to war against Germany so they could claim the city of Istanbul and control the strait for an outlet from the Black Sea. So he had all these three countries together that wanted war with Germany and would have gained something from war with Germany. Germany did not want a war with anybody. They were doing fantastically well without a war. And so the pot was boiling, and all that was needed was a trigger to cause this war to explode. And that trigger was provided when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophia went down to Bosnia and was shot, murdered by this guy, Prince of Gavrili, I think his name was.
Now Ben, what about the? I was reading that there was a train line that was going from up top there all the way down to Turkey or somewhere that they were making a beef about too. The British, they weren't happy that the Germans were putting a train line. Did you ever read about that?
I have read about it, but I don't know much about it. I don't remember much about it, but I think that was all those were factors.
Well, they were trying to open up. They were trying to open up trade with those countries, you know, where Turkey was and everything, from Germany all the way down. And I forgot the name of the train.
Germany was also building a fleet to compete with the great Royal Navy, and that was another factor.
Okay.
So all of these were factors that Great Britain began to feel that they were being threatened by the growth of Germany, and they wanted to. And I think also Great Britain at the time felt themselves to be in the ascendancy. They weren't growing anymore, and they were watching across the channel as Germany was in the ascendancy, and they felt that they had to do something before they didn't have the power to.
But now, as this war went on, World War I, weren't Germany winning? Weren't they winning against them?
Yes, I think in 1916, about November, something like that, they made a peace offer. Germany did. And Germany it appeared they were winning on all fronts, especially on the Eastern Front, but they were winning on the Western Front too. And they made a peace offer, and Britain turned them down. They didn't want, I guess they felt they'd invested too much and they had to win as justification for what the costs and so forth. After all, they went to work to destroy Germany, not to have peace with Germany. And so they turned it down, and about that time, a group of Jews, I think Han Weitzman was the leader of them, that kind of represented world Jewry, went to Arthur Balfour, I think he was the foreign minister, and made a presentation. They said, we think we can bring America into the war on Britain's side if you give us Palestine as a home for the Jewish people after the war is over. They signed the Balfour Declaration, and the Jews got busy with all the Jews that surrounded Wilson. They were these powerful Jews like Baruch. I can't remember the names of the others. I'm looking them up. But they were very wealthy Jews, and they were responsible for Wilson's success in politics. They made him president, as a matter of fact, and so they had control over him.
I heard they actually blackmailed them, actually.
But that was another factor, I've read that. I'm not definite about how much of that to believe, but how much of that was actually a factor, but maybe it was. But then 6 months after the Jews had went to Wilson, we declared war on Germany. Now, here's an interesting aside. The Jews actually favored Germany before this, and refused even to lend money to Britain and so forth, because the Jews hated Tsarist Russia, because the Jews in Tsarist Russia were suppressed, and they had a program, international program, of one day bringing the Tsar down, and they didn't like Britain because Britain was allied with Russia, and Germany was against Russia. Well, they liked Germany, But after they made this agreement, this Balfour Declaration, agreement for Palestine, they switched sides overnight and threw all their international effort in with the Allies, finance and everything. And they cut off German finance and began to create revolutionary trouble in Germany at the same time.
Right, right. Now, the thing that I read that really did it for Germany was the blockades. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that was instigated by Churchill.
Right.
You know, that's where he just emerged there as a young man, a warmongering SOB, and they had a total blockade around Germany. I forget exactly when it started, but it was devastating. It caused the deaths of almost 1 million German people.
Right.
Starvation blockade.
Right.
And, women, children, old people mostly, but several million people's their health was ruined as a result of this.
Right.
After, okay, the Germans had made the peace offer, a status quo anti-peace offer. Let's all go back home, nobody wins, nobody loses, let's stop the war. That was in 1916.
Yeah.
Said no, and when the United States came in on Britain's side, well, Germany simply could not stand up against this overwhelming combination of forces,
Right.
and so they had an armistice in November the 11th, 1918.
Yeah.
And it was an armistice. They were supposed to stop fighting until they could work out a peace agreement, but the Allies treated it as a German surrender.
Right.
They got together in Paris at the Versailles Palace in 1919 and worked out this peace agreement, which wound up as the Versailles Treaty.
Right.
And they called the German. They still had this blockade.
Right.
For 7 months after the war was over, they maintained a starvation blockade, which was immoral and inhuman,
Sure.
actually. And they called the Germans in and said, okay, sign here. And they read it over and they were appalled because the treaty held them responsible for starting the war, which they did not do,
Right.
and held them responsible for all the death and destruction caused by the war.
Right.
And they finally imposed reparations, some $35 billion in money at that time. I guess it's in the trillions
Wow.
in modern currency, mainly paid to France and some to Belgium.
Right.
Now, this Versailles Treaty virtually enslaved Germany. It cut their troops down, the number of people in their military, down to 100,000, not enough to defend the country, certainly not even enough to maintain peace in the country. They took their merchant fleet entirely and divided it amongst themselves. The Allies did, not the United States, but France and Britain did it. They took large chunks of Germany and gave it to other countries, along with the German people living in those regions. People went to Lithuania, Silesia, and part of East Prussia went to Poland. The Polish corridor cut Germany in two, with the East Prussia completely separated from Germany. The Sudetenland, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, had 3.8 million Germans lived there for hundreds of years, and they were the most prosperous people in the region, wanted very much to join Germany, wouldn't allow it. Austria was cut off. I think they had about 7 million people, something like that. There's a little rump state, completely unviable economically. They wanted to join Germany. The treaty wouldn't allow it. And so the point of the treaty, I mean, the purpose of the war was to knock Germany down as a competitor. And the purpose of the treaty was to hold Germany down, so they never would rise up and become a superpower again.
Right.
So that's what, they took most of their coal mines,
Right.
the richest farmlands, and finally they had to sign the treaty because the people were starving. Thousands a
Right.
week were starving to death.
Right.
And signed the treaty, but they didn't agree with it. They said
Right.
this is under duress.
Right. So now maybe you could tell us a little bit how Germany brought themselves up from the bootstraps from this, and we can get into maybe Hitler coming onto the scene too, I suppose.
Okay, well, the reparations that France demanded caused a runaway inflation. Germany didn't have the means of paying the reparations, but France demanded it and threatened to invade the country if they didn't pay it. So Germany resorted to printing money to pay it, which caused a runaway inflation and destroyed the German economy. A few years later, that was followed by a depression, which was far worse in Germany than it was in the United States. And people were starving to death. Something like 250,000 Germans in 3 years' time committed suicide out of total despair. The 30%, we had 1 or 2% unemployment in America at the time. They had 30%.
Yeah.
And so the country was, the people were demoralized. As I said, they were committing suicide. They were starving to death. And Hitler comes along and becomes chancellor.
Right.
I mean, it's a long process. Becomes chancellor. And he became chancellor. He campaigned to become chancellor on the promise that he was going to take the Jews virtually controlled the country to at least the extent that Jews controlled the United States today.
Right.
They controlled every institution, and Hitler promised to take these institutions away from the Jews and give them back over to the German people.
Right.
Here, I'll show you just one thing, how the Jews profited from this inflation. The Jews had access to international currencies, and they had pawn shops.
Right.
And the Germans had to sell everything they owned, and the Jews owned all the pawn shops, and so they wound up making big money off the Germans who ruined themselves. Not only that, they had to sell their land, their farmland, their homes, their buildings, and so forth. And the Jews with international currency came in and bought it. And by the end of the inflation, the Jews in Germany owned half of the real property in Germany.
Wow.
That's 1% of the population.
Right, right.
And the German people knew all about this, understood what happened, and they were seething with resentment. So that's part of the anti-Semitism that developed in Germany.
Right, right.
Hitler comes along and becomes, he's promising he's going to take, hand over this property back to the German people who owned it. International Jewry, right after Hitler became chancellor, declared war on Germany. Mm-hmm. Now, most people don't know anything about this, but it was big in the papers at the time, and they made big speeches and announcements encouraging worldwide Jewry. Now, these people are very powerful in finance, shipping, and they control the media.
Right.
So they control public opinion. And they declared total war against Germany.
Now, that was 1939, right? Or
34. 33.
Oh, that was okay. Because I thought 33 is when they.
That's when Hitler became chancellor. And within weeks after he became chancellor, international Jewry declared total war against Germany.
Okay, fine.
Boycotts, cut off credit.
Yes.
Wouldn't permit German goods and Jewish-owned shipping lines and so forth.
You're right. Okay. Yep.
Now, so here's what Hitler did. Hitler was a very smart man.
Yeah.
And of course, he surrounded himself with smart people too, Hjalmar Schacht and others. But the central banks all over the Western world are owned by Jews. I mean, let's be frank about it.
Right.
It was then, is now. And the Jews owned the central bank in Germany. And how the central banks work is that they produce the currency for a nation, and they lend it to the government at interest. Mm-hmm. So Hitler says, we don't need them. So he came up with a new currency, the Reichsmark, and it was printed by the government. No interest, no debt.
Right.
Well, he went further. He established a bar, since he couldn't have any, credit was cut off for international trade, he established a barter system.
Right.
Where he would, for example, trade a shipload of German coal for a shipload of Argentine wheat.
Right. And
the system of keeping track of, relative values and so forth. He established a principle, a policy of autarky, which is an economic term meaning economic self-sufficiency. He said anything that can be manufactured in Germany will be manufactured in Germany regardless of the cost. And they imposed tariffs, a tariff wall, to protect it from outside trade. So that revived German industry. Mm-hmm. Let's see, what else did he do? He started infrastructure renewal. He built the Autobahn, which was our own Autobahn system, the international interstate highway system. Eisenhower started that based on the German Autobahn. Right. Volkswagen car built and used Henry Ford as an advisor on how to do it and mass produce it and so forth. And this was a cheap car, family car. Volkswagen means people's car.
Yeah.
So, but then a couple of years, the unemployment rate was cut down by about 2/3. Within 5 years, they had a labor shortage.
Right.
They had the highest, within 5 years, they had the highest standard of living in the world.
Right.
In a very short period of time.
Right.
They had highest incidence of private ownership of cars.
Right. Right.
More people own the family car there than anywhere else. They created the Strength Through Joy, is what they called it, program. They eliminated the labor unions because the labor unions were trying to suck the blood out of the industries.
Yeah.
And established a government labor board, which established wages and so forth. Peace Through Joy, something, I forget what it is now. Dr. Robert Lay was put in charge of it. They built ocean liners and to take German workers on tours abroad, and they did all kinds of theater and stuff like that to enrich the lives of the German people. So they magically transformed Germany from this desperate, impoverished people to a happy, prosperous, most prosperous people in the world.
Right.
And Hitler and the Nazis, they didn't call themselves Nazis.
Right. National Socialists.
National Socialists.
Yeah.
Were highly praised by leaders all over the world.
Yeah.
And the German people, you get the impression reading the propaganda that this was an oppressive regime and locking everybody up. That's not true at all. The German people were happy and they loved Adolf Hitler.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Now the propaganda, because the Jews controlled the media throughout the West, the people who were suffering, if you can call it that, but not really that much, were the Jews, who were 0.9% of the population. 500,000 Jews in a country of 650,000, 65 million people. And the Jews invented communism. Communism and Judaism is one and the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They were constantly inciting revolution. They were inciting, the Jews also controlled the labor movement.
Sure, yeah.
And they were inciting riots and strikes and so forth, and just causing trouble all around, and they were relentlessly trying to take over the German government and make a Soviet Socialist Republic like they had done in Russia. So Hitler had Dachau built, and he locked all these people up, not because they were Jews necessarily, not even actually, but because they were communists and labor troublemakers.
Right.
And it turned out that almost all of them were Jews. And the international Jewish press screamed bloody murder over this and further vilified Germany.
Right. So now maybe you could tell us about, see, a lot of people think that Hitler had a policy that he wanted to kill them all, extermination. But his real policy was emigration, right? He wanted to get them out.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. They had the Nuremberg laws where they restricted, the Jews really were inordinately powerful in Germany. The majority of the professors in the universities were Jews, majority of the lawyers, doctors. They filled up the government and they controlled everything.
Right.
So Hitler decided he was going to reduce their power.
Right.
And so what was the question you asked me?
I'm getting into the transfer agreement. That's what I'm getting into.
Right, yes, and he wanted these people out of Germany.
Right.
What Hitler wanted to do was have a homogeneous population of German-speaking Germans. He was a national socialist. Right. National means having a homogeneous German people. And socialist was to take care of all of them and make equality, create equality and this kind of stuff. So to do that, he wanted, the Jews keep bringing up the gypsies, so they're not alone, I think, but he wanted to get the gypsies out. They were almost insignificant. But he wanted the Jews to immigrate out of Germany. And so they had an agreement with the people down in Israel, Palestine,
the Zionists.
Transfer agreement, to enable these Jews to, they opened a bank in Palestine, which was a branch of the bank in Germany, so they could transfer money back and forth. Mm-hmm. And they permitted these Jews to transfer their wealth down to Palestine. If they'd moved down there, they could transfer their money. And it's a lie that these people were stripped of all their wealth. They weren't.
Right.
And so the object was to get them to immigrate out of the country. And by 1939, they had 500,000 Jews in Germany in 1933. By 1939, they had 190,000.
Okay.
And they annexed Austria also, and they had 180,000 Jews, and by the 39, they had 40,000. So most of them had immigrated peacefully.
Right. All right. So now we have we have a little situation here that the Zionists, as far as I understand here, they're the ones that wanted their own people out of there too to send to Palestine, right?
Yeah, the Zion. Yeah, okay, you're breaking up again, but I heard what you said.
Okay.
The Zionism was a movement that was started by Theodor Herzl back about in the late 1800s. And because the Jews were discriminated against, they brought it on themselves, but because they were, he thought the Jews should have a homeland of their own. They'd been, before that, spread all around the country with small Jewish minorities living amongst Gentile host populations. And Theodor Herzl started the Zionist movement, and a lot of other people joined in. They thought the Jews should have a homeland of their own, and that would solve all this discrimination problem. So they decided that Palestine was going to be it. The Balfour Declaration gave Jews. And so in order to make this thing work, they had to have Jews in all over Europe and America and so forth, and the Middle East, immigrate down to Palestine and become Jewish citizens.
Right.
Now, a lot of Jews didn't want to do that because they liked to just find where they were.
Right.
And so Hitler and the Nazis, if you will, worked in cooperation with these people down in Palestine to have these Jews immigrate down. And that's they let them have their wealth to encourage them to go down, to leave voluntarily. Right. And an awful lot of them did.
Now, what happened to stop that, though? In other words, it stopped, right? So
it stopped. The British stepped in and said, wait a minute, this is causing trouble with our Arab friends down here. This is going to be a disaster. Of course, they were prescient because it has turned into a disaster.
Right.
And they stopped it, and so then the war began, and everything was on hold as far as the
Okay, so now what did Hitler have to do with these Jews now? I mean, you talked about Dachau, but that was political prisoners. So now the other Jews who didn't go, what happened there with them?
Well, international Jewry, to look at it from the Germans' perspective, I mean, the official story now is that these Jews, for no reason whatsoever, were discriminated against and harassed and persecuted and so forth just because they were Jews. That's not quite true. International Jewry was still in a war, a declared war on Germany, and the Jews that lived in the diaspora, as it's called, these small populations all around other countries, were part of the international Jewish nation, considered themselves part, the international Jewish leaders considered themselves. So these German people living inside Germany were in a declared war against the country they lived in for all practical purposes, and they made a lot of trouble for revolutionary trouble. So that's why when the war started, they started to lock them up in concentration camps. But you know, it's interesting. The story is that they had this program, German government program of rounding up all of Europe's Jews and putting them in concentration camps and then exterminating them. My wife and I went out to Dachau several years ago, over 10 years ago, something like that. And we got a taxi driver to take us out to Dachau. We're in Munich. And the taxi driver, he had a big Mercedes, and he happened to be an engineer, he happened to be Jewish also, and he was an engineer, and he used his car part-time to take tourists out, to make extra money. So we were talking about events as we drove out, and he said his mother spent the war years in Munich. And I said, wait a minute, I thought, this is all part of my process of developing, my ideas today. I said, wait a minute, I thought they rounded up all the Jews and put them in concentration camps. He said, well, not all of them.
Right. So. Well, I've heard that Hitler actually had German Jewish soldiers that worked, that was working
Field Marshal Milch let's see, what did he do? Part of the military-industrial
Yeah.
complex that he controlled. He was a Jew,
Right.
and there were others.
Yeah, I know there was a book written on that, saying Hitler's willing soldiers or something like that. 150,000.
Yeah,
Jews,
exactly. That,
You know, that
yeah,
were,
I think the assimilated Jews had no problem. It was the ones who identified as communists and as
Right.
brothers of the Bolsheviks and the Soviet Union, who were constituted a fifth column or a Trojan horse inside Germany, that they worried about.
right, okay. And they had just reasons to corral them all up, right, and do that. I mean,
I'm sorry,
I mean, they had reason to do that. The Germans had just reason to do that.
They had just cause to do it.
Yeah.
Of course they did. They'd been stupid not to have
Right.
isolated these people who were devoted to undermining the country
Right.
they lived in on behalf of international Jewry, whose headquarters were in Moscow.
Right. Maybe now you could talk to us a little bit about the Holocaust, how that came into play here.
Yeah. Let me tell you a little story. I've told this before, but the first book I read, like I was a brand new ensign, that's like a second lieutenant in the Army, brand new ensign in a Navy squadron pilot, and somebody had bought a book called Treblinka, and I forget the author of it now, but it was passed around. A number of us read it. I read it, and I was appalled. This was what went on, written by a Jew about what went on in the Treblinka concentration camp. One little thing the Nazi guards did, as it stands out that I remember, is that they would line Jews up in a row, one behind the other, and they would shoot the Jew in the chest in the front with a bullet to see how many bodies it would pass through. Then they would change calibers, another larger caliber, to see another line of Jews to see how many bodies it would pass through. And they did this for sport. And I was a little skeptical of that even then. Now it sounds absurd. Turned out this guy, anyway, this was the first Holocaust book I ever read, and it was like seeing a bloody auto accident. You can't look away, and yet it's repellent at the same time. I read everything I could get my hands on about the Holocaust after that, picture books, everything, and swallowed it, had no countervailing arguments, and but began to feel that it was exaggerated. You know, a lot of these things, wait a minute, that's implausible. And not only that, you'd see picture books, wait a minute, I just saw this picture in another book that had a different caption. And then I started to wonder, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures of the camps and the war, but never a picture of a gas chamber.
Right.
Never a picture of dead bodies being pulled out of the gas chamber. They show a bunch of fully dressed people, women, children with the Star of David on their shirt, by a train where they just got it unloaded, and the caption would say, these people are on their way to the gas chamber.
Right.
Well, we could have been on their way to lunch, you know.
Right.
But, and so you start to be skeptical eventually. Now, I was skeptical, and I went out to Poland in 1989 with met a friend out in Lodz. He had a distant relative out there, and I stayed with him for a while. I went to Warsaw and traveled all around to find these sites. I've been reading all about it, and I wanted to see what it looked like firsthand. Went to Warsaw ghetto, and not much of it left. Then I wound up down in Krakow, near Auschwitz, and I wanted to go out to Auschwitz. And I asked the maitre d' if he could connect me with a taxi driver, tour guide, who knew something about this. So I met this guy. He's a Polish history professor, and that's not unusual, by the way. We had a whole history professor in Istanbul as a tour guide also.
Mm-hmm.
But I asked him why he did that. He said he could make $400 a month as a tour guide, and he could make $100 a month as a history professor. Mm-hmm. So that's why he did it. He took me all around the sites in Krakow, the Hans Frank's office. He was the Gauleiter of that area. The last day we went out to Auschwitz. Now it turned out the professor was born in Auschwitz, in Oswiecim. That's the Polish name of the town. And they lived in a little house, he and his family, right outside of the wire of Dachau. And you can see everything there. He took me there.
Now, do you mean Auschwitz? Yes, you're talking about Auschwitz.
Auschwitz, I'm sorry.
Okay,
yeah.
right, all right.
but it's surrounded by farmland. No, Dachau. I don't mean Dachau, I mean Birkenau.
Oh, Birkenau.
Birkenau, yeah. Okay, they're surrounded by farmland with houses all around it, and you've got a big fence around the compounds, and you can stand outside and see everything. There's no wall, nothing is blocked. You can see everything. Now, this guy was in his mid to late 60s and had been a teenager during the war. This is 1989. And so we went out to his house where he lived, and I'm standing there looking into this compound of old barracks buildings and, what remains of it. And I said, well, how did you feel standing out here watching all this brutality and murder going on inside? And he smiled and he said, oh, those are just stories. Nothing of the kind happened here. He said, this was a well-organized, well-run labor camp.
Right.
I said, what about the gas chamber? He said, there was no gas chamber. And that's the first time I'd heard that. And no gas chamber. So then we went inside. He said what he saw as a boy was columns of workers that would line up outside the front gate, and they'd be controlled by 2 or 3 armed guards, and they would walk off to the factories that circled Auschwitz, producing war material.
Sure, yeah.
And they'd go out in the morning and come back in the evening. If they were going to some distance, they had trucks that picked them up and took them out, brought them back. And inside, anyway, we went inside and took the official tour. This is in '89, and there weren't a lot of tourists at that time. There are floods of them now, I understand.
Yeah.
But we walked around and followed the official tour guide, and he explained all the horrific things that happened. Here's a bin of women's hair, and supposedly they cut the Jews' hair off so they could sell it to a mattress company to make mattresses.
Yeah.
And they had shoes, a bin of shoes, and all that. He pulled me aside. Okay, they cut their hair off for lice control because to control typhus. They have bins of shoes because they gave them a new uniform and new shoes.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And on and on. And every place we stopped, he pulled me aside and told me what the real story was. Then after the tour, anyway, they took us to the gas chamber. He said, this is no gas chamber. This was a bomb shelter or something.
Sure, yeah.
And so he took me around and showed me this Olympic-sized swimming pool they had. I went to both Auschwitz and Birkenau, and I forget where the swimming pool was exactly.
Auschwitz 1 has a swimming pool.
I think it's Auschwitz 1 has the swimming pool, yeah. And there was a theater where the inmates were allowed to go. There was they had an orchestra composed of inmates. They had a soccer field, all of this stuff.
Yeah.
To the hospital. He said they weren't slaughtering people here. Right. And after that, since then, I don't believe a word of the Holocaust story.
Oh, no, I know. Well, that's my expertise. That's what I've been getting into
I noticed, yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, so now, why do you think the Jews are so adamant about that Holocaust claim?
Well, I think they've profited enormously by it. It was a justification for the creation of the state of Israel. Harry Truman recognized them. The argument was the Jewish people had to have a place, to avoid this happening to them again.
Right.
They have gotten enormous reparations from Germany, something like
billions.
I don't know how many billions they've gotten.
Yeah,
Even 70 years after the war is over, you've got 500,000 Jews that are on lifetime pensions.
Right.
German government living mainly in America and Israel as Holocaust survivors.
Right.
Yeah, another thing, they put that number on their arm. Why in the world did they do that? You start to ask the question.
Yeah.
Well, these Germans bring all of these Jews in on a train, tattoo a number on their arm, cut their hair off,
right.
sit in the shower, give them a new uniform.
Yeah.
If they're going to exterminate them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
right. Now the other thing that I find too about the Holocaust myth is that they actually had to protect the Allies or make it look like the Allies were innocent and make the Germans look like they were the bad guys. So everything the Allies did wrong was covered up by the Holocaust.
Yeah, it was justified.
Yeah.
The end of the war was total chaos for Germany. I said in the book that 8 million Germans died during the war, and 13 million died after the war was over as a result of the abuse and slaughter and starvation and all that happened to the Germans after the war.
Yeah.
And we justified this somehow because they had carried out this Holocaust.
Right.
And the Nuremberg trials afterwards, the Holocaust was the central theme.
Right.
And it justified executing a lot of Germany's leaders.
Right. How many Jews do you think died at the most? What do you think?
It's certainly less than 1 million. The 6 million was just plucked out of the air. The 6 million is an iconic number that's going back to the beginning of the century, and they've stated it numerous times that 6 million Jews are in danger of dying, over and over and over again. Then, sure enough, when the war was over, 6 million died.
Right.
The number is absolutely meaningless. They modified the number that died in Auschwitz down from 4 million down to 1 million, yet they didn't reduce the total number. So 6 million is just an iconic number.
Yeah.
I've read that not more than 65,000 Jews died, up to less than 1 million. So
that's what I get out of it.
But that's got to be compared to 55 million died all total. What's so special about the Jewish numbers? When 55 million people died in Europe as a result of the war, and 1 million or 6 million, whichever.
Well, look at the Germans. How many Germans died? Right? You said, 20 million Germans died.
Yeah, they expelled 15 million of them from East Europe, Poland, Prussia, East Prussia, and Hungary, everywhere else, and pushed them into Europe. And 3 million of them, it's estimated, died from brutality, outright murder, exposure, everything.
Right.
And they were brutal to these German populations still living in the Sudetenland, for example. The Czechs were just brutal to these people. Mass murder.
Right. Let me ask you this, in regards to you writing this book, okay? Have you had any flack, any problems? Because again, this book, I mean, it really just exposes the Jews, exposes the lies. Everything that we've been talking about here. Have you had any repercussions on this?
Nothing personal yet. I'm surprised I haven't. A couple of people around here in Jacksonville who, have commented that it's anti-Semitic that read it. But the reviews, some of the reviews, for Amazon books, for example, I've got about 125, I think, up to this point. And almost all of them give it 5 stars, except for the Jews who give it 1 star.
I know. That's always going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's how you know you're doing good. You know you're doing good. So, I'm just very surprised that nothing's happened to you, because I get a lot of flack in what I'm doing.
Of course.
And I mean, I'm retired, so I don't worry about working anymore. But when I was working, they did affect my business. So, I'm glad I retired. But they came after me like gangbusters. I mean, they just came after me unbelievably,
You're breaking up again. Anyway, let's go back and look at the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia.
Okay.
This, I read a lot about that over the years, and I kept seeing these Jewish names pop up, obvious Jewish names pop up. They never identified the Bolsheviks as Jews, but there were a lot of Jewish names in there. And you kind of get the idea, wait a minute, there's an awful lot of Jews involved in this. And then I started to go back and read. I read one by Wilton, Robert Wilton, is that it? I think he was a reporter for a London newspaper, and he'd been there throughout the war, and it was called something about the death of the royal family. And he's the one that laid it right out there. It was kind of an addendum to the book in the end. And he said that he named all the names. And so I copied and pasted that in my book to show all the names. The reason I did it was you can throw numbers out there, but it's a lot more impressive to have the names of all these individuals and put what their ethnicity is. But there was something like 555 or something like that, of the top 550 people in the Bolshevik government, that controlled the Bolshevik government, 437 of them were Jews.
Right.
And even the ones that were not Jews, a large number of them were married to Jewish spouses, Jewish wives. And almost none of them were Russian. They were Polish, Georgian, or Latvian, or whatever. The ones that were not Jews. I mean, there were almost no Russians in the Bolshevik government.
Right.
They took control. This was a coup d'etat. This Russian Revolution with Trotsky and Lenin was a coup d'etat, a Jewish coup d'etat of the Russian state.
Right.
There's that today, and the history books don't say that at all.
Right.
They ruled over Russia as an alien force.
Right.
And they lorded it over them, and they hated the Russian people because they'd been discriminated against, and it was international Jewry hated Russia, and it was on their top of their agenda to one day bring down the Russian government. Well, the war had weakened it sufficiently that now they were able to do it.
Right.
And he killed the Tsar, too, by the way, and his family,
Right.
all Jews who did that.
Right. Right. Now, Benton, do you have any other books you're working on now, or what?
No, I'm trying to think of something. I've thought about writing something about the occupation of Germany and what happened during the occupation. I may do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever heard the book Hellstorm?
I read it. Yeah.
Oh, you read it, yeah. Because he talked about what happened when the Russians came in and all that. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what I'd like to see you do? I'd like to see you go out on tour.
Well, I've been afraid of that. I'm afraid that tomatoes might be thrown at me or something. But
I mean, you'd have to set it up really well. You know, I'd like to see that. I mean, it would be a great tour. You know, if you did that. You know.
if I retire, I might do that.
Well, yeah, that'd probably be good. You know.
I'm 78. And so they can't do much to me at my age.
You know, you do. I have a twin brother too. You know.
You have what?
I have a twin brother.
Oh, I have a twin brother.
Yeah, I know. You mentioned that in the beginning. Interesting. You know. Well, I think that pretty much covers this. Unless you have anything else you'd like to say about your plans, what you plan to do with the book, or anything like that. Any plans?
It's done better than I expected. I didn't write it to make money or anything. I wrote it because I'd gotten to the point where I said somebody needs to put all this together. And because, you know, over the years, reading one book after another, and especially reading the other side of the story, written by Germans and so on, the dots begin to emerge, and you start putting them together, and pretty soon it's just crystal clear. You see what happened.
Right.
And the Spanish Civil War, for example. I always thought I read Ernest Hemingway's book. I read a half a dozen books on the Spanish Civil War. And in all cases, they have these Jewish names, you know, on the socialist side. And the American, what they call it, the American group that went over there, I can't think of it right now. Anyway, a group of Americans that went over. Their leader was a guy named Wolf, who was a Jew, and the guy who was head of the people, you know, the people who'd been in the war back here.
Veterans, you mean?
I'm trying to say the veterans of the Spanish-American Civil War.
Yeah.
Was a Jew, and I'm thinking, you know, and you read all this stuff, and you say, wait a minute, there's more to this than appears.
Yeah. Well, the whole slave trade was run by Jews.
But there's a common thread running through here that involves Jews. And pretty soon you say, well, Judaism and communism is the same thing. And when the Jews imposed their power over Russia, they set about to kill scores of millions of Russians. They did it deliberately in the most bestial fashion you can imagine.
Right.
They settling scores. And they were wiping out whole groups, the bourgeoisie, you know, which included, I guess, the aristocracy and the estate owners and the possessing classes. They set out to kill those people.
Right.
For example, they would leave, they had this checkup. I forget, it's an acronym, I forget exactly what it stands for.
Yeah.
But 75% of the members, of the agents of this Cheka were Jews.
Right.
25% who were not Jews, almost none were Russian. They were these Georgians, Poles, and so forth. And a great number of those had Jewish wives. So this was a Jewish entity.
Right.
They created the Comintern, Communist International, for the purpose of exporting the revolution to Europe and bringing down regimes and existing regimes and replacing them with Jewish-controlled Soviet republics.
Right, right. What do you think about the United States? You think it's controlled by the Jews?
Yeah. You know, I was just I'm reading a book now about Allen Dulles and the CIA. I forget the name of it, but I'm about halfway through it. And it's talking about the origins of the CIA, the people from the Ivy League schools, you know, the kind of the upper class in America. They're the ones who joined the ISS, I think it was, in World War II, which after the war became the CIA.
Right.
And he's naming all these people, and it's the American, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant upper crust that runs the State Department at that time and the CIA. Mm-hmm. They were Arabists. They were called Arabists. They had an affinity for the Arab, you know, close relationship with the Arabs, which was destroyed when Israel became a state in 1948. And then I was amazed at how, as Dulles, as this author was describing, who ran the country in the 50s, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. We have transitioned over, they've been all totally displaced by Jews. Right. The Jews run every institution and every department of our government, the neocons, neoconservatives. Right. I don't know if you know the origin of them, but they came out of the Trotskyite wing of the Communist Party. Okay. And they hate Russia. Why do they hate Russia? Because they hated Stalin. And they hate Russia now. It's back to the same old, reverting right back to the pre-revolutionary years when the international Jews hated Russia. And now they've evolved right back to it. They controlled Russia from 1919 till shortly after World War II, when Stalin began to turn against them and purged them. And then they started to leave Russia after looting it, by the way. Yeah. And, now that was the center of Jewish power, was the Soviet Union. And now the center of Jewish power is in Israel and America. About 6 million Jews in Israel, 6 million in America, who work together today, closely together, to bleed America for the benefit of Israel. We send billions of dollars to Israel. American people don't approve of that. Right. But these neocons that have positions of power and control in this country funnel billions of dollars, the latest technology, everything, into Israel. They've got they got one of the most powerful armed forces in the world in tiny Israel with the latest technology. They got their nuclear weapons from us. I mean, the technology to build them. They got about 400 nuclear weapons. And Israel and American neocons together control our foreign policy.
Right. Now, would you say that it doesn't make any difference who the president is, right? Wouldn't you say?
Donald Trump might, but I'm not sure, make a difference. Right. But there's the deep state, they call it, which pulls all the strings. Obama wants to close Guantanamo Bay, for example. But he hasn't done it yet. Right. Why? Because he doesn't have the power to do it. The real power are the people who make the decisions and so forth. But it's incredible the extent to which our country is controlled by Israel and the neocons in this country working together.
Yeah, it doesn't look too promising, does it?
No. They're the ones behind this multiculturalism. Right. I don't know if you've ever heard of Kevin McDonald.
Oh, sure, yeah, I've read his stuff, yeah.
I've read his stuff. Yeah. He explains how they've done it behind the scenes, using frontmen, Gentile frontmen like Teddy Kennedy to pass the last Immigration Act in 1965, which opened our doors to these floods of third world, non-white, non-Christian people, and they did it deliberately to undermine the white majority. Right. And they got away with it because of this anti-Nazi propaganda. Right. This racism, they said. I don't see anything wrong with nationalism. I think nationalism is the natural way that peoples ought to be organized. Right. Organize themselves. But he wanted a homogeneous German population, and the Jews have made that out to be sinful.
Right. Yet if you go to Israel today, they don't allow any of this there.
That's exactly right.
Bunch of hypocrites. Unbelievable. Wow. Well, Benton, this is really great. I think we covered from A to Z here quite a bit. You know, hopefully, if you ever do get a chance to write another book, you know, that would be. I'm definitely going to be reading that. I've been telling everybody about your book. I mean, every place I go, I say it's the best book I've ever written to give me the whole story. Now I understand what happened with World War One. How World War II is just an extension of World War One.
Well, they tried to bring revolution to Europe, and they did overthrow Hungary for a time under Bela Kun. He had a 100% Jewish administration, and they raised bloody hell with, you know, launched a war of terror against the Hungarian people. Admiral Horthy with the Romanian army came in and threw them out and saved. But it caused intense anti-Semitism in Hungary as a result of that.
Right.
What they did, they came into Germany, and for a time they had the Soviet Socialist Republic of Bavaria until the Freikorps came in and kicked them out. And then there was the Spartacus revolt and revolution in Berlin with Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, Jews, leading it. So and then they tried the same thing in Italy. Mussolini saved Italy.
Right. The
Jewish culture.
Right, and he's a bad guy now.
Yeah, he's a bad guy now. And then Franco was also a bad guy, but not as bad as Mussolini.
Right.
He saved Spain from the Jewish communist takeover. Hitler saved Czechoslovakia. And it's one of the things, this absurd thing about appeasement today. Even John McCain uses it all the time, you know, ridiculing somebody because they want to appease somebody.
Right.
Appeasement was actually successful.
Right.
Britain and France, they were warmongers, wanted to make war against Germany for annexing the Sudetenland, which had 3.8 million Germans who wanted to join Germany.
Right.
No reason why they shouldn't have.
Wow.
But then the Czechoslovakia kind of fell apart along ethnic lines with groups rejoining their original country. And that left Bohemia and Moravia, where Prague is the head of that. That's where the Czechs are. That was the only thing that remained of Czechoslovakia. They had 180,000 Jews, most of which were communists and ready, in direct communication with the Comintern in Moscow, ready to turn Moravia and Bohemia into a communist state right in the heart of Europe. Would have been a disaster if that had happened. And Hitler wouldn't let it happen, and so he made it a protectorate.
Right.
So that the communists wouldn't take it over. He saved Central Europe from the communist takeover. Right. And yet, that's used today as an example of how appeasement doesn't work. Look, we made this agreement, appeasement, and then he went in and made it a protectorate.
Right.
But he did it for a reason that we all ought to thank him for.
Right, right.
He kept the communists out of Central Europe. So.
Well, you know, Churchill, I believe it was Churchill who said, we slaughtered the wrong pig.
Yeah.
Didn't he say that? I thought that's what he said. Well, that's what I heard he said anyway, whether he said it or not, you know. Well, Benton, I really want to thank you for this time together. You did a great job.
Thank you.
And this video is probably going to get you more books.
Well, my sales doubled as a result of you're promoting it, so
I'm telling
thank you very much.
All the programs, because I'm on programs and interviews, and I've always brought it up, and every book that I talk about, the top 5 books, this is probably, I would think this is number 1, honestly, and then I get into my Holocaust books. But if you want to understand everything exactly from the beginning, this is the book to get, so I recommend it. But anyway, I want to thank you for being on my show today, and I will get this video to you when it's done. I'll show it to you. You can watch it, and I'm going to put it up on YouTube at some point.
Okay.
You know, hopefully you can hear me.
I enjoyed it. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, Ben. You take care now. God bless. Bye now.
Bye-bye.